Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third and final T. William and Patricia Ayers Global Tipping Points Series event of 2022. I can't believe that it's already November and that we are looking at some of our final events of the year, but we are also looking forward to 2023 and some of the really interesting conversations that we'll be having next year. My name is Tim Horgan, and I am the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. And welcome to everyone who's watching this event live here tonight, or to those who are watching the recording. We really appreciate your interest in these critical discussions on global affairs. The World Affairs Council is a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization. And as a membership organization, we rely on the support of the community to continue to bring these programs to you. If you are interested and find value in our work, please do consider a donation or becoming a member. You can see where those opportunities are on our website. We really could not do this without your support and your interest. Also, as a nonpartisan organization, we do not take any stances on policy, politicians, parties, or issues. We are here to be the platform for conversation and for bringing expert voices so that you can cut through all of the noise in the world to really focus in on some of the key issues driving the world today. I want to thank Southern New Hampshire University, our mission partner, for all that they do to help support the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. We really could not do this without you. We are forever indebted to your very generous help in making this organization possible. I also want to take a moment to thank the New Hampshire chapter of the Fulbright Association for your support of this series in particular. We always love having our friends from New Hampshire Fulbright join us, and tonight we have Bill DeVries here from the New Hampshire Fulbright chapter to give a little bit of a welcome himself. Bill?
Hi, I'm Bill DeVries, president of the New Hampshire chapter of the Fulbright Association, who's a co-sponsor of these presentations. The Fulbright Association is a nonprofit organization constituted to support the Fulbright program, which is the educational exchange program of the United States Department of State. The Fulbright program operates as a partnership between the United States and the foreign governments in over 160 countries, with funding coming from both the U.S. and the foreign government. It is an exchange program, so there are roughly equal numbers of Americans going abroad and foreign citizens coming to the U.S. There are a variety of different kinds of Fulbright grant opportunity, grants to conduct independent study abroad or for a foreign citizen here, grants to pursue research, a degree, or a certificate at a university, grants to teach English or some other language here in elementary or secondary schools, grants to teach at foreign universities, grants to teach here, grants for civil servants or other citizens with special expertise to learn how other places work or to teach them how we do things. Grantees are often young, just beginning to build their careers. But there are many senior Fulbright Fellows as well. I want to encourage everyone here, both students, faculty, but also staff and other citizens, to look into the program and see whether there is something there that would enrich your life, advance your career, or contribute to society. Participating in the Fulbright program is a life-changing experience, and I can speak from personal experience on that score. Closer to home, the Fulbright Association seeks to orchestrate interesting and educational experiences for Fulbright alumni and their friends, to support Fulbright scholars visiting from abroad, and to engage in activities that aim to keep the Fulbright program strong. We believe that the kind of outreach embodied in the Fulbright program is an essential and vital part of American diplomacy. I invite you to help us keep this important program strong. Thank you. Now back to you, Tim.
Thanks so much, Bill. We, again, really appreciate your support and interest in making these great programs possible. So I now want to bring Dr. Ayesha Jalal on for tonight's event. Thank you so much, Dr. Jalal, for joining us here on what is a very interesting day to be talking about what is going on in Pakistan and Southeast Asia as a broader region. Dr. Jalal is a professor at Tufts University in the Fletcher School and the Mary Richardson Chair. She has been at Tufts since 1999 and been at the Fletcher School since 2003. Previously, she was a fellow at Trinity College, Leverhulme Fellow at the Center of South Asian Studies, a fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C., and I could go on and on about all of the amazing experiences that Dr. Jalal has had, but I want to turn it over to Dr. Jalal here so that she can get started on some comments, and then we'll move into a bit of a question and answer. We invite you all to send us your questions. You can do that in the chat on the website, the WACNH website, or email us at council@wacnh.org. All right, Dr. Jalal, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tim. I wanted to first of all thank you for inviting me and the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire for convening this very interesting virtual discussion. We generally tend to think of democracy and authoritarianism as stark antithetical opposites, but in a sense, democracy and authoritarianism have been historically bound in a complex and sometimes even intimate relationship. The global emergence of quite a few democratically authoritarian leaders today has made explicit what has always been an underlying feature of the history of democratic practice. The authoritarian strain was always, in a sense, more marked in countries aspiring for democracy by shedding a long inheritance of colonial despotism. As I had argued in a book that I published in 1995, Democracy and Authoritarianism in South Asia. India's and Pakistan's trysts with democracy and authoritarianism after winning independence from British rule exemplify the struggle to establish democratic norms amidst the lure of falling back on the pre-existing structures of an authoritarian legacy. Yesterday, President Biden warned us of the grave risks to democracy in the United States of America. Currently, both India and Pakistan face broadly similar risks. India, as a formal democracy, is being engulfed in a rising tide of religious majoritarianism and authoritarianism, while Pakistan is struggling uncertainly to establish basic democratic norms and practices following decades of military dominance of its state structure. My opening remarks are partly drawn from a final chapter of a just published book, an updated edition of a jointly authored book called Modern South Asia, the 5th edition of it, and also an article that we've also jointly written for a book project entitled When Democracy Breaks. In both India and Pakistan, most of the colonial inheritance of the states of exception remained on the statute books after 1947, including the law on sedition, enshrined as Section 124 of the 19th century Indian Penal Code. It is being deployed today in India to brand as quote-unquote anti-national those people expressing disaffection towards a government that is seen by many to have done incalculable harm to the very idea of India. In May of 2022, the Supreme Court of India, at long last, began hearing challenges to this colonial era law. As secularism and socialism have lost legitimacy as justificatory ideologies of a centralized post-colonial state roughly since the 1980s, an implicit and then explicit resort was made to Hindu religious majoritarianism to shore up central state authority against myriad regional and also subaltern challenges. That trend reached its apogee in the victory of the Bharatiya Janata Party, or the BJP, and the installation of Narendra Modi as Prime Minister in 2014. 2014, and then his re-election in 2019. The relentless onslaught on democratic institutions, including the media and the judiciary in recent years, has led opposition leaders and political commentators to talk darkly about an undeclared emergency in today's India. The dominance of a democratically elected authoritarian leader, along with the organizational muscle provided by the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, or the RSS, arguably poses a graver challenge to the world's largest democracy than the one that was overcome after a rather brief period of emergency in 1977. It is majoritarianism masquerading as democracy that undergirds the authoritarian turn in contemporary global politics. And in that sense, Modi is not unique and is of a piece with Erdogan in Turkey, Trump here, and Bolsonaro in Brazil in the manipulation of religious or race-based majorities. Modi certainly precedes and rivals Trump in the use of the language of citizenship and illegal immigration to mask virulently anti-minority prejudice. For instance, during the election campaign in 2014, he proclaimed that on the day the results were to be announced, he would drive all illegal immigrants across the border of Bangladesh. The citizenship crisis that erupted in India in December of 2019 could be traced back really to the tenor of the election campaign in 2014. During Modi's first term, there were concerns expressed about his regime fomenting intolerance, which is really an euphemism for a wave of unreason, injustice, and inhumanity that has swept across India. Students crying for freedom or azadi were charged with sedition and assaulted by stormtroopers of the ruling party inside court premises. Scholars and writers faced systematic intimidation, and few have been killed, and that intimidation continues. To disagree with the government is to be anti-national. So-called intolerance took the most grotesque form of lynching Muslims and Dalits, or lower caste Hindus suspected of eating beef or taking part in the beef trade. There were scores of such horrible incidents since 2014. In 2015, Muhammad Ikhlaq, the father of an Indian Air Force officer, was killed by a mob not far away from Delhi on the mere suspicion of storing beef in his refrigerator. In a sense, it symbolized the death of Ikhlaq. His name actually means ethics or good governance, the death of Ikhlaq in India. In most cases, it was the victims and not the perpetrators of these hate crimes who were subjected to the strong arm of the law. From the topmost echelons of the government, there were the feeblest disapprovals or disavowals of the taking of precious lives in the name of protecting the cow. Speaking in the 16th Lok Sabha on August 9th, 2017, Prime Minister Modi proclaimed that the 5 years from 2017 to 2022 would replicate the extraordinary journey of 1942 to 1947, from Sankalp to Siddhi, from resolution to realization. Outside Parliament, Modi had remarked that the next 5 years would be transformative because the holders of the top constitutional posts all subscribed to the same ideology. It was not difficult to infer from this that he had resolved to realize the ideological project of political Hindutva by building the edifice of a Hindu Rashtra, a Hindu state. Once he was re-elected Prime Minister for a second term in 2019, Modi and his Home Minister Amit Shah began spearheading the attempt to redefine the very idea of India in the religious majoritarian mold by the time of the 75th anniversary of India's independence that is being celebrated this year. In July 2019, the government railroaded through Parliament an amendment to the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act that empowered the Modi regime to proclaim any individual a terrorist and hold such a person in detention without trial for a period of up to 2 years. This law, interestingly enough, bore a striking resemblance to the Rowlatt Act of 100 years ago in colonial India, against which Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi had launched his first All India Satyagraha or non-cooperation movement in 1919. The Mahatma had dubbed the Rowlatt Act as a lawless law enacted by a satanic government. The Modi regime's stance on preventive detention was a clear indication of its intent to behave more and more like its authoritarian colonial predecessor. And then on August 5th, 2019, the Modi government extinguished the vestiges of democracy in Jammu and Kashmir. The autonomy for Jammu and Kashmir enshrined in Article 370 had been already whittled down by successive Congress regimes since really 1954. A dead letter for decades, and even though this had been a dead letter for decades, it took an audacious BJP government to give it an unceremonial burial. But it did more than that. Through accompanying legislation that downgraded and then bifurcated the state to the status of two union territories, it heaped humiliation on a regional people and declared its determination to achieve integration through the sheer force of arms. What followed was an indefinite and unprecedented communication lockdown, hand in hand with a military clampdown on the Kashmir Valley. A brazen and reckless assault on federalism and democracy, the government's move was really designed to provoke further alienation instead of nurturing a sense of belonging to the Indian Union. A supine Supreme Court failed to entertain writs of habeas corpus filed on behalf of leaders and activists imprisoned without trial. Instead, a five-member bench, including the Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi, delivered a verdict on a long-standing land dispute in Ayodhya, rewarding, in their astonishing judgment, the very vandals who had torn down a historic mosque in 1992. Emboldened by their seemingly unimpeded march towards establishing a Hindu majoritarian state, the Modi government used its parliamentary majority to pass a Citizen Amendment Act, the CAA, in December of 2019. This was ostensibly designed to provide a fast track to citizenship to non-Muslim immigrants from Muslim-majority countries like Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. This move, introducing for the first time a religious test for citizenship, struck a raw nerve and provoked large-scale protests against the discriminatory law, led by women, students, and youth. The law itself came to be viewed in conjunction with repeated threats made by the Home Minister, Amit Shah, to compile for the whole country a National Register of Citizens, NRC, which would form the basis for weeding out anyone deemed to be illegal and illegal immigrants, infiltrators, and those described by him as termites. An exercise to draw up a national register of citizens in the northeastern state of Assam has already left nearly 2 million people excluded, many of them Hindus, facing the specter of statelessness and confinement in detention camps. A cynical move by the regime to target minorities came to be seen as a declaration of war on the undocumented poor, but clearly the undocumented women being in the lead are the most affected in this exclusion process. As the resistance against the CAA and the NRC and also the NPR, which is the National Population Register that would facilitate an exclusionary NRC, gathered momentum, a flustered government responded with police brutality, especially in BJP-ruled states such as Uttar Pradesh. Muslim homes, as we speak, are being literally bulldozed in India's most populous state, especially for the homes of those who are believed to be involved in protests. Muslims have no representation in parliament from this most populous state in India, despite forming 18% of its population. The de facto suspension of the fundamental rights to life and liberty, including habeas corpus, lends credence to the view that India does in fact face an undeclared emergency. Protesters across India, especially some very brave men and women, recited the uplifting preamble to the Constitution of India, where, quote, "we the people grant to themselves liberty, equality, fraternity, and justice." There is a need for idealistic youth to recognize the importance of resorting to both reason and emotion in upholding the spirit of the Constitution against the cunning use of certain constitutional provisions by majoritarianism, rampant to transform a democracy into a dictatorship and a federation into a unitary state. Turning to Pakistan, Pakistan reached a historic milestone on 15th March 2013, when in a country where there had been decades of military dictatorship, the National Assembly completed its term and allowing for a peaceful transfer of power from one elected government to another for the first time in the country's history. With elections scheduled for 11th May 2013, fears of a military intervention or some improbable twist in the political saga gave way to a growing realization of just how much Pakistan had changed. Nawaz Sharif's emergence at the helm of the largest single party in the National Assembly was largely anticipated. But then winning elections in Pakistan is easier than governing a country in institutional disarray after decades of military dominance, intervention, and control. Moreover, staying in office requires the tacit approval of the all-powerful military high command and by implication, a willingness to do its bidding. Nawaz Sharif managed to survive a carefully choreographed attempt by Imran Khan's PTI, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, to challenge the legitimacy of the 2013 elections by leading a sustained protest movement in the national capital. The onset of the war in Yemen in 2014 tested Nawaz Sharif's relationship with not only the military, but also Saudi Arabia, to whom he owed his life after the 1999 military coup, and where he lived in exile until allowed to return home again in 2007. Matters eventually came to a head when the Pakistani parliament refused to sanction sending ground troops and other military assistance to Yemen on Saudi Arabia's request. This ruffled the top brass no end, especially because they're accustomed to calling the shots on defense matters. In one of the most politically significant and well-publicized cases in Pakistan's judicial history, the Supreme Court disqualified Nawaz Sharif from holding public office on a technicality. The Prime Minister had failed to disclose his employment in a Dubai-based company on his nomination papers. The 2018 elections were remarkable in many respects. I happened to be there observing them. Not only was one of the country's most popular political leaders running his party's electoral campaign from jail, but with few exceptions, the country's electronic media, both public and private, was chanting a singular narrative in which there could be only one potential winner in the forthcoming elections, Imran Khan and his PTI, as the PML leadership was deemed to be corrupt and thoroughly discredited. There was, however, a disconnect between the uniformity of the narrative orchestrated by intelligence agencies and the electoral preferences of a large number of Punjabi voters. Nawaz Sharif and his can-do brother, Shahbaz Sharif, the powerful former chief minister of Punjab, were too well entrenched in the country's largest province to be allowed to contest elections unfettered. To undercut the PMLN's electoral base, a newly formed sectarian organization known as the Tehreek-e-Labbaik, or the TLP, was encouraged to contest from key constituencies with a view to fragment the vote in favor of the PTI, and they did. Imran Khan's tenure as prime minister in what came to be referred to as a hybrid government with shared civilian and military control was lackluster at best. The record on the governance front was dismal, most notably in Punjab, despite some successes in managing the COVID pandemic. Spiraling inflation created a serious legitimacy crisis for the PTI government, raising questions about its future electoral prospects. There were also questions about the likely course of relations with the military establishment, which recalibrated its support for the PTI after being disappointed with its performance on the economic front. Imran Khan lost power after being defeated in a no-confidence vote earlier this year, and a multi-party government headed by Shehbaz Sharif was installed. The ousted leader has launched a raging populist street campaign by seeking to exploit an undercurrent of anti-American sentiment in a large section of the electorate. Today's news of Imran Khan having been shot and wounded is sure to contribute to further instability in Pakistan. The future course of democracy in Pakistan is inextricably linked with its capacity for overcoming terror, both conceptually and existentially. For all its litany of woes, however, Pakistan is not going to disappear from the map of the world in any great hurry. If the political mainstream had accommodated regional demands, not manipulated them to suit the purposes of the incumbent government, the curbs on military rule would have been far more effective than they proved to be. The army continues to shape foreign and defense policies and has the ultimate say in internal security matters. The ability to prevent a military coup does not imply civilian supremacy. It will take decades of an unbroken process of democratic politics in which governments are voted in and out of office before civilians can really begin to try and match the clout of their military counterparts. The role of the US as Pakistan's patron par excellence until recently has given way to belief in a potentially dramatic turnaround with the help of China blowing the tantalizing bugle of his one belt, one road policy. Whether the boons of what's known as CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, will be distributed equally or become another means for private accumulation at public expense, will in large part determine the country's future. In India, the BJP, led by Modi, will continue fanning the flames of religious majoritarianism until the next general elections that are scheduled for the spring of 2024. With the main opposition party, the Indian National Congress, in complete disarray, it would seem, the BJP will be challenged by an array of regional parties, which may end up forming some sort of a federal front. Regional political forces will strenuously contest the over-centralization of state power that has taken place under the current regime. Americans need to take an interest in the economically and strategically vital region, which is South Asia, where nearly a quarter of the world's population lives for a variety of reasons. China, the main rival of the US on the global scene, has emerged as a bigger factor in the South Asian subcontinent and the Indian Ocean interregional arena than ever before. Despite various points of contention between India and Pakistan, as well as India and China, all three countries have taken a broadly similar position on the Russia-Ukraine conflict that does not align with the position of the US and Western Europe. Above all, Americans have a lot to learn about the crisis of democracy at home by studying the interplay of democracy and authoritarianism in both India and Pakistan. Confirmed cynics may argue that the very notion of a substantive democracy is a spurious ahistorical ideal. Then why is there so much ado about democracy? Why should democracy occupy a higher moral ground than overt authoritarianism? Well, because democracy, for all its imperfections, is a historical phenomenon which still evokes expectations of social justice, equality, and human self-fulfillment. The same really cannot be said of authoritarianism, whether overt or covert. When there's rampant illiteracy and poverty, to say nothing of state repression, substantive democracy is not just an abstract ideal, but an impelling necessity. Short of plugging the leaks, waves of socio-economic disaffection can scuttle India's formal democracy. And when formal democracy itself is like a raft bouncing precariously on open sea, as is the case in Pakistan, the waves of authoritarianism are always near at hand to strike back with a vengeance. I'll stop there and take some question and answers.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jalal. We've been getting a lot of really good questions coming in throughout, and you can still send us your questions for Dr. Jalal here. We've got about half an hour to get through quite a few questions, so I'm really happy about that. Please do keep sending them our way. But I want to start off with a question of my own, and you touched a little bit on this. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship, tenuous as it is? Dive a little deeper into what the relationship between China, India, Pakistan is, where it's headed, and whether or not the U.S. Should worry about some of the inroads that China is making with these countries.
Well, I mean, Pakistan's relationship with China is of long standing. I mean, they frequently refer to each other as, all-weather friends. And so that relationship has been deepening over the years. It's, really began in the 60s, early 60s, and then we've seen a steady increase in that relationship over the years. And now with CPEC as China's, as one of the major parts of China's Belt and Road Initiative, it's clearly much closer than ever before. There have been periods of ripples in the relationship, as most recently under Imran Khan, but I think that the patch up is currently underway. India, of course, looks upon that relationship with grave concern, but India has not necessarily avoided doing work with China, trading with China. In fact, it has a bigger trading repertoire with China than Pakistan, which is really insignificant compared to India, given the sizes of the two countries. So India, while they have boundary disputes, the McMahon Line remains a tantalizing point of contention between the two. India does do some business with China. It will be cautious about China's role in the Indian Ocean arena, of course, and especially in Pakistan, but has not desisted from taking advantage when that advantage is clearly in India's interest. So having said that, I think China's footprint in the region is certainly growing, and with the infrastructural developments that are coming in, seems likely to grow further.
Well, in all three countries, India being sort of the fulcrum of all of this, have some form of border dispute, which we've seen last year. China and India trading fire across the undemarcated border there. Of course, the long-standing tensions between India and Pakistan. Do you see any of those tensions as a potential flashpoint that should be concerning to Americans and the broader world at this point? Or is their deepening relationships going to paper over those issues for the time being?
No, absolutely, Tim. I don't think that the relationship with India and Pakistan is anything to be sanguine about. In fact, it deteriorated significantly under Prime Minister Modi's government. I think as far as the US is concerned, the flashpoint is undoubtedly Kashmir. Unfortunately, most people think about Kashmir as some sort of a religious dispute between these two countries, but there's a very strong water dimension. India, as the upper riparian, is in control. So Pakistan is very concerned about the potential of India using water as a weapon. So that will remain a major point of contention between the prospect of water wars continues to loom large. So I would say that these, and the fact that anything can go wrong at any time between the two nuclear neighbors should be a matter of deep concern to the United States.
Yeah, I never want to, with all that we're seeing with Russia rattling their nuclear sabers, anything that we can do to keep the nuclear powers from ratcheting things up any further is good. I want to key in on a question from an audience member here, Carol. She wants to know, how is it that seemingly so many people are willing to give up democracy and turn to a strong leader? Is it economics, simply nationalism, something deeper? I think this ties well with your point about Kashmir here.
Well, I think one of the things is really post 9/11, a lot of people feel that the specter of terror, which of course has played a very key role in national narratives, suggests that if the specter of terror is not being targeted adequately by a country, then perhaps authoritarianism is better. So I have heard people in India say that, perhaps we should give up some of our liberties in order for the state to take stronger action against terror. So this is what is playing a role. As for economics, those who have a self-interest, if you're a big business corporate leader, you may feel that a more powerful All India center, more authoritarian, may be better for them. But I don't think that necessarily includes many other people. But I do think that the issue of terror, the threat to the integrity of the country, these are factors that have led people to say that maybe we should give up some liberties.
Okay, and we have a question here from Karina in Salem, and she's interested to learn a little bit more about what the U.S. can do to help promote democracy in these key countries, and is it in our best interest to do so?
I think that's a very good question. I think if you look at the past history of the U.S., the U.S. is not, balked from supporting military governments. In fact, I think the evidence suggests that the relations have tended to be closer when Pakistan has had a military ruler in power than when Pakistan has had a civilian government. So I think that there are reasons to believe that despite America's stated goals of promoting democracy, there may be occasions when America finds it in its interest to work with an authoritarian regime.
That certainly has been the case the world over, it seems like, in our history. And that ties nicely in with a question that John has here for you. Will the U.S. attempts to work more closely with India on security help or hurt democracy in that country?
I think that's a tricky question. The U.S. would like to work on security with India. It would like to see the progress in the strategic partnership. They would like to see more entry points into the Indian market. So all of that will be there. And at least sort of ostensibly, America would support the democratic process. But the issue that I was trying to point out is that the democratic process, we need to deepen our own understanding of what we mean by democracy. Democracy is not just about going to the ballot box and voting in a new government, because you can have the democratic process elect authoritarian leaders. So I think that there has to be a constant sort of effort, not just looking at elections, but to actually look at the nature of governance that is being offered after a successful electoral process.
Okay, we had a good follow-up question here. So who are the factions who are working within these countries to support democracy there? What kind of efforts are ongoing to push back against authoritarianism?
Well, I think in India, the pushback has been rather weak. The only groups that you can see pushing back would be some of the the regional parties. But if you look at the main institutions of India, the Supreme Court has pretty much toed the line of the government. The media is corporate owned, and the corporate owners of this media are very close to the Modi government. So there hasn't been much pushback in India. What we did see in 2019 that I was referring to were the spontaneous demonstrations that erupted in India against the Citizenship Amendment Act. So those pushbacks are there. But then the pandemic sort of put an end to that. There was a terrible there were terrible violence in Delhi when President Trump was visiting, and that also is thought to have played a role in countering the civil movement to challenge the government. So there are many things that are, the state apparatus is, of course, under the Modi government, and it can be deployed very effectively by them, especially in states where they're in power. So whilst there is a pushback, the odds are heavily weighted against these people who are fighting for democracy.
Okay. Well, that's not the most empowering or positive, but we appreciate the real insights. So one of the questions that I wanted to pull up here, let me just find it again. looking at the impact of Afghanistan, can you speak about the impact of the collapse of the international coalition-supported government in Afghanistan and how it has affected democracies in the region?
Well, I think first of all, one has to accept that the Afghanistan withdrawal and the way it occurred and the ongoing problems in Afghanistan have had a deep security impact on Pakistan. There's been a surge in Taliban activity in places like Swat after many years, attributed to efforts by the government to try and negotiate with them. But what's fascinating, and I think this might be of interest to the audience, is that in Swat, the people have come out and protested against the Taliban emerging again. They don't want a return to that kind of era of complete sort of disorder, no existence of law and order. So I think that the fact that the people themselves, the residents of Swat and the surrounding areas themselves are protesting the presence of the Taliban is a very good sign. But nevertheless, one of the great problems of the situation in Afghanistan is the larger regional impact of that instability that continues to be the primary factor in Afghanistan.
And we just had another good question come here on that. With the U.S. out of Afghanistan and Pakistan's close relationship with China, is there any chance of us working with that country moving forward? I think
that's another very good question that we've been debating for years, whether China can play the good, a positive role in Afghanistan, largely because if it can, the Pakistan army has not been easy to control from the United States point of view because it sort of acts in its own quote unquote interests, which, as we have seen, were not aligned with the US. But China has a much greater, has much greater clout with the Pakistan army, and so at one level we have speculated whether China can play the good role. It has the resources, and if it helps to develop Afghanistan, then there may be something to be said about also keeping a watch on the Pak army and what it does. But these are all speculations. This hasn't really happened as yet.
And I think the general sense here with some of the questions that I'm seeing is, how does the U.S. navigate this region as we continue to compete with China in various spheres of influence and various sectors? So how is it possible to have both countries have enough space in the region to work and maneuver? Or is this another area of conflict between the US and China that may lead to a further deterioration of relationships?
I don't see anything inherently preventing the two countries. The US has limited interest in Pakistan, let's face it. It has no interest now really in Afghanistan other than to ensure that it doesn't become another hotbed of terror. The US interest at the moment is India. And so I would have thought that if China can keep Pakistan on an even keel because China has clout with the army, then it may be possible for the US to also attain some of its objectives vis-a-vis Pakistan without necessarily seeing the China factor as a zero-sum game. But I think so that would be my view on this.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting time in that relationship to try and find those balance points where we can maybe work together for a positive future when we have such competing interests in many ways. So let me see here. We've got a question here from George that you spoke about the fear of terrorism as a reason for declining democracy. What is the real threat of large-scale terrorism in India?
Well, India complains about terrorism in Kashmir. It complains about the possibility of terror. So, the terror narrative is very much there. And India has its own, even away from Pakistan, it has had its own problems with the Maoists, with the Naxalites. So all that is there. But I think there isn't anything remotely similar to what the threat that Afghanistan potentially can pose to Pakistan at the moment. I mean, of course, if Pakistan itself is overcome by terror, then India will be in great danger.
Okay, so it seems like there is a lot going on in India in particular about sort of raising the specter of these various threats, whether they're nationalist, whether they're terrorists, or so can you talk a little bit about how the use of basically scare tactics are one of Modi's go-to motivations and ways to sort of continue to crack down and consolidate power? What are the real threats, and what are some of the more inflated threats that he's talking about as a way to, again, sort of consolidate that power?
I mean, the real threat, is that Mr. Modi is playing the hate card, targeting the Muslim and seeing the Muslim as the primary problem, linked to Pakistan, linked to terror, and basically pushing in the process an authoritarian model for India, which doesn't just affect the Muslims, but also affects his opponents, who could be Hindu or Sikh or whatever other religion. So it's this move towards authoritarianism based on at least two big sort of slogans. One, of course, is the goal for Hindu Rashtra, a Hindu state, which is what they want. And the other is keeping the Muslims in place. And as a community which is otherized, which is demonized, which is seen to be related to Pakistan. So those are the two factors that I think are the dangers for India, because these can slip. And create. I mean, the Muslims are not just a small minority. I mean, by 2050, India is slated to become the largest Muslim country in the world. Today, there are more Muslims in India than in Pakistan. So I think that we need to realize that this could be, this demonizing of a community for political purposes and justifying authoritarian measures because of the threat could really lead to much greater trouble for India.
Yeah, I think the demonization of the other is something that we see a lot of in the world today, and something that is certainly a concerning trend but seems to be a winning argument in many cases, unfortunately.
It's a mobilizational technique, Tim. It's a political mobilizational technique, and it's working for Modi. Has been working, and the point is that he's got the institutional strength to use it to the maximum advantage for his own purposes.
Yeah. Speaking of mobilization techniques, I want to go back. You mentioned briefly the assassination attempt on former Prime Minister Khan. George here is asking what is going on with the assassination attempt. And, we don't know a lot right now. Of course, it just happened earlier today. But I think the real interesting question is that we can answer now is, what was he doing with his protest caravan? So what was going on with that large group of people he was driving towards the capital?
Well, former Prime Minister Imran Khan has been agitating ever since he was dislodged from power through a no confidence motion, suggesting that he was brought down illegally. And so he's been agitating ever since. He's been demanding elections. And in this instance, he was once again leading what he calls a quote unquote long march from Lahore, the capital of Punjab, to Islamabad, the Pakistani capital. A very slow-moving caravan because it's meant to galvanize support all the way. Between Lahore and Islamabad, and of course, with media there, and so he was attacked. He was speaking. He was speaking to an audience when one person in the audience who is disaffected and claims that he acted alone. We don't know the whole story, but so far the information suggests that he was annoyed with Imran Khan for quote unquote misleading the people. That's what is the story. It could, be a much bigger conspiracy, as the PTI or Imran Khan's supporters suggest and believe. But so far we don't have the information, and unfortunately, with political violence in Pakistan, especially assassinations, it's very, really hard to find out the actual causes. I mean, that's been a historic failure. So I'm not sure whether we will get to the bottom of it, but it's clear indication that we've known that his life is in threat, is threatened. When you do these sorts of grand marches, anything's possible. So it's fortunate that he hasn't. That something worse hasn't happened, and he's stable in stable conditions. But one person did die.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that whole scenario plays out. When that popped up on my Twitter feed this morning, I was like, well, I guess we have certainly timed this well for tonight's conversation. So, we'll probably have to have you come back and give an assessment once things become a little more clear. So we have another question here that I'm really interested in getting to. It seems that authoritarians are using the same playbook across the world. Are they learning from each other as they go? Or is this a well-worn path that is sort of coming back into fashion?
I think that's an excellent question, Tim. I've long suspected that Imran Khan's picked up a lot of tips from Trump. I don't know about Bolsonaro, but I do think that there is some borrowing and adaptation taking place. But then, of course, there's something to be also said about the whole phenomena of a right-wing authoritarian leader with a populist touch. So I think that if we were to take this comparatively, we do find similarities. I think it's populism is a particular kind of phenomena. We've seen left-wing populism. Of course, people have forgotten that, but we saw it in the 70s. Now we have been witnessing right-wing authoritarianism, populist authoritarianism, and they do have definite similarities. And so there's no question about that.
Yeah, it is an interesting phenomenon that you definitely wonder about. And leads into
populism, as you know, is the foregrounding of the personality. There's a cult of personality. And what one needs to understand with right-wing populism is that this is more about emotions. It's not about reasoning with anyone. And that, I think, is what's going on with Imran Khan, that Imran Khan is a hugely popular leader for people. And you cannot reason with his followers. Nothing sticks, whether he's disqualified, whatever they say about him. I think that's what it is, that nothing really sticks because of that emotive power that these people generate. We've seen that with Bolsonaro. His supporters are not prepared to accept that he's lost the election. So I think this is something that we need, and I think the Trump factor is there for us to think about as well. So we need to understand that dealing with this phenomena is not going to be helped with our presenting reasoned, rational arguments.
And that is the tough part, right? You want to just say, well, it doesn't make sense to go to authoritarianism. You should want democracy.
But this is an emotional thing. This is emotive, highly affective politics. Yeah. So I think this is something that we have to get our head around.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and going, I've been holding this question in my back pocket, so I hope the person who asked it about half an hour ago isn't thinking that I'm forgetting about them. But I think this is a good time to bring it in, because not only can authoritarians learn from each other around the world, so can democracies. So the question is, what lessons would or should the U.S. best learn from these countries and their democratic decline?
Well, I do think that the U.S. Needs to do some thinking. The U.S. has supported authoritarianism, military authoritarianism, throughout the Cold War era. In the case of Pakistan, I've already said that its relations with Pakistan was strongest in Ayub's time, General Ayub's time, General Ziaul-Haq's time, General Musharraf's time. So it's quite clear that there has been a pattern. And if the US really wants to promote democracies, then it has to sort of understand that working with the military exclusively, the big sort of complaint about the US and Pakistan is that it has no interest in Pakistan. It was only interested in the military. So I think that will have to change if America really wants to support democracy in a country like Pakistan. As for India, I think America's interests, it's assumed that India is a democracy, so that's not a problem. I think America needs to waken up to the reality that India is slipping badly on the democratic chart. So I think that realism has to come in, and steps taken to ensure that this kind of horror that's being perpetrated across the board in India is not allowed. But I'm not sure that the US is prepared to do that because of its economic and strategic interests with India. So I think that the balancing act has to be there. I mean, you've got to put your words and your actions in the same place.
Absolutely. And, it is certainly interesting to sort of look at the history of the US support for democracy or authoritarians in what we believe is in our best interest. So I think we have time for two more questions. I'm going to go first to this question that came in via email. Overall, do you believe that a world with more democracies are in the US interest, or should we just leave countries to their own devices?
Well, I think the US has left countries to its own devices, claims to the contrary. But I do think in some instances it has actively encouraged non-democratic governments as well. I mean, US interests change. And the big question is whether promoting democracies at the moment is advisable. I think that it's more consistent with what America actually professes. Whether that is realistic politics in certain regions remains to be seen. I mean, it may well be that the US does not want to promote democracy in certain regions because of fear that it may result in something contrary to US interests. I think is the primary factor. Even though we talk of democracy, this is about US interests.
Yeah, and it really drives home the point that we are self-interested.
Everybody is, Tim. I think that is to be fair. Yeah. But I mean, the US's role as a moral entity in the world has stemmed from its position on democracy and human rights. But increasingly, we've seen it failing on these fronts. So it has to decide whether it wants to persist. I would only say that you have to sort of decide whether democracy really is still the goal and human rights.
Yeah, and I think you're well pointed to say that sort of perception is everything. The U.S. is perceived to be meddling in everything, or is used as the scapegoat when protests and countries.
I think Pakistan's a very good example with Imran Khan. I mean, Imran Khan is basically getting into a narrative that already exists. I mean, this narrative is not created by him; it existed. So he's taking advantage of this anti-Americanism that already exists in Pakistan, even if it has no basis in terms of the U.S. role in ousting him. So I think this is the real danger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it always troubles me when we are trying to work with countries where people are not necessarily supportive of the U.S. But I understand that not everyone in Pakistan, not everybody in a single country necessarily dislikes us or loves us, and that's just the reality of being one of the indispensable nations on the.
Well, I mean, the irony in Pakistan, I might add for your audience, is that the institution that most needs America is the military. It's the most dependent on America, but it is also the institution which is so all-powerful that it can use this anti-American narrative to its own advantage, which it did. It did it throughout that Afghan period that America was in, and I think that's been the problem.
Yeah. Okay, I want to get to this one final question from Charlie. She asks, there have been many migrants to the U.S. from India, and their population is more wealthy than other Asian migrants who may have come in that period. What impact will out-migration to the U.S. and to other Western countries will that have on India, particularly the upper echelons of society leaving the country?
Well, I think already it has been having an impact. I mean, some of the staunchest supporters of Narendra Modi are in this country, and they are amongst the rich and famous and well-ensconced people. So the diasporic population, I think, especially the wealthy, they want a very different view of India. They want to see India rising, India everywhere. and not India, the poor, struggling country where millions of people are still below the poverty line. So I think it's this particular sort of the diasporic success wants to also have a different sort of a narrative on India, which looks away from India's problems to building up India as this great, wonderful power. So I think that's where I would say that it is having this outmigration, and people doing well in the US generally want a positive narrative on India. And I think this applies to Pakistanis as well, but they're not as successful as Indians.
Yeah, I think everybody would like the world to view their country as a positive,
especially when you're in the US. Yes.
Yes, I think that certainly applies to us as well. Well, we've come to our hour here. Thank you so much, Dr. Jalal, for joining us. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. I think based on the wide array of questions we got here tonight, we certainly had an interesting conversation, and we really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you to everyone for joining us here tonight. We really appreciate it. Your support and interest is what makes us continue our work here. We really need you to let us know what you think. We'll be sending out an email with a survey for the event here tonight to anyone who had registered. So please do take a few minutes to give us your feedback on tonight's event. We'll really appreciate your thoughts and insights. Also, just a heads up, if you haven't seen it in our emails or social media, December 1st is going to be our Global Business Forum. We are going to be hearing from Dr. Ashley Stevens, a heavyweight in the technology transfer university corporate partnership sphere, and how that little known industry is really driving global connections, driving innovation, and creating a better world for us all. We hope that you can join us for that event on December 1st, both in person and online. So sign up today at wacnh.org. Thank you again to everyone for your interest in this event and all of the great work of the World Affairs Council, and have a wonderful evening.